Dose, 2 grams of benzydamine. I start with the lights on low, 50%, pink-red blend. 5 minutes in, I'm feeling nausea already, hair standing on end. Last time it took 50 minutes, literally 10 times as long to take effect. This is extremely unusual, which adds to the anxiety caused by the benzy. 10 minutes in, feeling tingles on my cheeks and neck. I'm already feeling a dry throat. Things are definitely moving way too fast. I can tell my pupils are dilating, and the room is getting visibly brighter. I'm seeing the classic tracers and star-like specks now. A wave of benzy-induced anxiety hits me like a semi-truck. The fear is powerful, but not overpowering. I think I can cope. I spin my eyes in circles to clear my peripheral vision of horrors when it gets too much. I feel hot and cold flashes throughout my body. My hearing seems like it's cranked to the highest sensitivity, and my vision is starting to sort of swing a little, even when I'm not moving my eyes. The effects subside a bit just for a few seconds, like the valley between waves in the ocean, the calm before the hellstorm. I feel multiple puffs of wind blow across my right ear, like breathing, as though someone is directly behind me, which I recognize from my last trip. This repeated experience gives me a confidence boost, but before I can compose myself for the experience to come, I am hit with a wave of mind fog. The fog has turned into a full-blown head high, like smoking way too much sativa, yet even worse, as the backdrop of the trip creeps into the high, turning it dark and anxious. I hear the sound of crawling spiders, a blend of faint plasticky clicking and soft hissing. I start to hear phantom voices as well. 45 minutes in, I feel very dizzy and have extreme difficulty concentrating on anything. I simply write DF in my live jot notes, not sure if I missed the C key or if I try to recall the word concentrating, but couldn't, settling for focusing instead. After a couple minutes, my mind clears and I change it to DC. I feel breath across my skin again, this time across the back of my neck. It takes me a few moments to realize I'm feeling breath underneath my neck warmer. I wore it specifically to cope with the constant feeling of neck tingles. I feel chills. This is not going well. I start to feel the crawling sensation of spiders moving all across my body. Within only a couple minutes, I suddenly feel fear like none I have ever known in my entire life. Impending doom crushes down on me. I am terrified, so much that I do not even think to bring up the question of what I fear. I later recall after the trip seeing dozens and dozens of human-sized spirits and creatures, along with many spiders, all twisted and menacing, moving fast in the dimly lit room in my peripheral vision, mere feet away from where I sat. It felt as busy as an underworld street in the darkest pit of hell, crowded with vicious, angry demons just waiting to flay my mind into pieces as soon as the benzy took full effect and hallucinations started manifesting in my direct vision. The music coming through my headphones is indecipherable, just white background noise. It no longer has any positive effect on my mental fortitude. I try to access the part of my mind where I store my stress management skills, but I can't find it in all the brain fog. I recite spiritual verses, ones that I've known for years, the same ones that guided me through my last trip with ease. They feel empty, sucked dry of meaning. I spin my eyes in circles, but the demonic spirits return as soon as my eyes stop, and I can't keep it up forever. Pure panic consumes me, the visceral, survival instincts kind of fear I've only felt when I literally blacked out from oxygen deprivation. I instinctively grab my phone and turn my LED light to the brightest, whitest setting. It feels like breaking my head above the water within seconds of drowning, but I have no energy to feel relieved, and it would be short-lived anyhow. Within moments, the raw, unhinged terror returns, like a gigantic anvil falling on my shoulders. I feel as though my horror manifests itself in my very body. My hands are shaking so bad I can barely type any jot notes. I'm feeling vertigo so strong, my eyes literally cannot focus on anything. The room is spinning like a half pendulum as my focus swings left and upward, then suddenly snaps back to straight ahead, repeating this motion 2 to 3 times every second. It's literally nauseating, so much so that I don't even have the spare focus to realize the sickening irony in that my very coping mechanisms are morphing into symptoms that intensify the fear I'm trying to handle. Complex thoughts are beyond me. An hour in. The anxiety is unbearable. I feel so exhausted, I literally cannot think to save myself. My entire body is heavy and sore. It's like I can feel the benzy flowing through my veins, poisoning every part of my body. Breathing is difficult and painful. I am utterly void of energy, of power, and even mental. Exerting the willpower to conjure a single thought other than pure horror is like trying to lift a skyscraper with only my bare hands. All I can manage to record is, "can't type." I hear the floor creaking in my room, and the fact that it's a concrete basement apartment only magnifies my reaction to it. The chair I'm sitting in starts making way too much noise. Am I unaware of my own fidgeting, or is something very large with way too many legs crawling around on the underside? The nausea is overwhelming. Everything is overwhelming, but I'm starting to feel like I may actually puke. I still have no energy, so I can't even brace myself for the trip and the new horrors I know await. I'm exhausted, sleepy, and scared. The thought of ending the trip rushes into my mind. This trip is getting grim. I look at the table and see a can of energy drink. It's risky, but I am desperate. I down what feels like a massive gulp, but in reality is a tiny sip. I feel every muscle in my mouth and throat straining to operate. Not only is the act of using any muscle a massive task, but the thought power to be aware of and feel them working drains me. Then, like a gift from the gods, every symptom starts subsiding. I take bearing of my mind, my body, my situation. I drink more, a little bit of willpower. I drink more, a little less fear. It's still mind-numbingly horrifying. My body still feels like it's being crushed by cinder blocks, and I can barely piece my thoughts together, but I am no longer paralyzed by fear. I have what feels like about a third of the can, or about 53 milligrams. I spend a great deal of time savoring this tiny fragment of solace I can get in the midst of my damnation. Finally, I take a couple more sips, gather the tattered remains of my willpower, and head out. As I leave my room and walk down the hallway to the bathroom, I see in my peripheral vision multiple grudge/ring-looking girls and a couple adult-sized ones run at me from behind. I almost don't make it to the bathroom, but thanks to a brief blackout, the distance is halved. I shut and lock the door. Inside, everything is white, and the light of midday brightens it even more. I kneel with my face in the porcelain bowl for what feels like 20 or 30 minutes. I'm seesawing between holding it down because I don't want to feel the stomach acid burning my already sore and dry throat, mouth, and nose, or gaining just a tiny fraction of my willpower back by letting go. I end up setting for the former because I need as much water and calories in my stomach as I can keep down. I feel intensely sick, both worse and different than a flu or a hangover, a cursed sickness. It takes me a while to get back up and prepare to return. When I do open the bathroom door and head back to my room, I don't feel nearly as much fear of the grudge girls, despite the unnerving and extremely vivid pitter-patter of half a dozen pairs of bare feet behind me. They're so close I can feel their breath on my neck. I feel one of them tug at the back of my shirt. After opening the floodgates of hell in my own bedroom a mere hour ago, this is a welcome change. I'm in agony. Walking, even standing, is a breathtaking, painful challenge. I climb into bed. I used up all the energy I gained in that bathroom trip. It's getting worse again. I check the stopwatch. 90 minutes. I'm a long way from peak. I finished the other 2/3 of my energy drink, taking breaks to let the nausea subside, then taking another painful gulp down my sandpaper throat. I feel the energy slowly slip away as the paralyzing exhaustion overpowers the caffeine. I try sleeping it off instead, but when I close my eyes, I see spiders, demons, and unspeakable horrors. Every second my eyes are closed, my closed-eye visuals get more and more vivid and more dark and disturbing until I open them in scared shock at the realness of it. One time I try to close my eyes and I suddenly see a gigantic demon made of rock with horns bigger than a rhino burst through my doorway, wood dust and splinters flying as it charges at me. My eyes snap open at the vivid jump scare. The dream lasted less than a second, yet it felt like I was there, like everything I saw was real and could affect me. The feeling dissipates as soon as I open my eyes. The room is getting much more sinister in the conscious world. There is no escape. The doors of hell cannot be shut so easily. I have a spread on the table with food, water, juice, and electrolytes. I try solid food, but it tastes like rubber coated in WD-40. I start sipping juice. My stomach tries to pirouette jump out of my chest, but I manage to keep it down. Each sip gets a little easier. Waves of dizziness and mind fog come and go, unending since the very beginning, and continue for the entire trip, harbingers of dark spirits that are soon to appear. A particularly intense wave hits me. I feel phantom spiders crawling all over my head. I brush at something on my ear, not sure if it is a phantom spider or hair. It's a hair. I brush it off my ear and back into place, but it sticks to my hand. I blink. The hair is gone. It wasn't real. The vividness of it scares me. I tuck my hands under the covers, but no sooner than do I feel a small patch of gluey sticky threads on the underside of the blanket. I bring my hands back up and see a tiny splotch of white on my right thumb. I try brushing it off with my finger, but it sticks to it, stretching across both digits. It's a spider web. I'm scared shitless. It disappears in a blink, but that just scares me more. Anything is possible now. Touch, sound, vision, taste, pain. The most horrific fables, the most terrifying renditions of hell, the most unimaginable torture scenarios. They are now all within the realm of existence, and I am still not at peak. The room seems to darken, nearing the same dimness as the very beginning, despite the light being turned up as bright as I can get it. It's as if hell is swallowing up the light like a waking nightmare. Every time I breathe or fidget, I hear the sound of tiny silken spider threads snapping, like an army of spiders is gluing the back of my shirt to the pillow. It feels like it too. I feel lots of very strong, vivid tingles and jabbing pains. My silhouette on the wall next to me moves, even when I look directly at it. Despite the crushing fear and brain fog, I managed to type a final foreboding message for the experience log. In shadows now, not as planned. I need daylight. This room is no longer safe, and it's about to get much worse. I decide to take refuge in the living room. I grab my laptop and as much provisions from my table as I can carry, and brace myself for the trip. I take a deep, ragged, painful breath into my sore chest and open the door. The only place not bathed in sunlight is the dining room, which is on the opposite side of the living room. Hallucinations always spawn in shadows. My bedroom door is halfway. I have a head start and I don't waste it. I rush to the living room and tug the door closed behind me, blocking off the grudge girls that I can hear running after me. I lay on the couch with the full light of day streaming in through the 12-foot wide window and prepare for what is to come. 2 hours in, I see shelves and power cords twitching and jerking like they're possessed in my peripheral vision. In my direct vision, the bare walls bulge outward in sudden popping motions. My shoes are extremely loud. I can hear every single rubber squeaking and canvas brushing sound as if I have a megaphone next to them. As soon as I laid down, I feel the crawling, tingling, stabbing spiders return as they glue my shirt to the couch. I see shadow people for the first time, even though the room is piercingly bright. I see them come and go for a while in the corner of the living room, barely more than 5 feet away from me. Then, the main attraction arrives. I'm suddenly hit, but not physically, mentally. I'm confused. I can't piece sentences together in my head. I am just rambling random words connect to each other like a broken autocomplete. Every few seconds I'll realize what I just thought made no sense, but as I try to understand what's happening, I'll start rambling again. Then it really hits me. My memory jumps. It's not like a blackout. It feels like a completely unbroken series of events. I feel normal under the circumstances, then suddenly I feel totally disconnected from myself. I don't know who I am. I don't recognize my body. I don't understand my own thoughts. Wait, no, I know who I am. These aren't thoughts. These are memories, emotional memories. I remember the feeling of not knowing who I am. I remember not being myself. I'm remembering what it's like to feel true delirium, and it is terrifying. I have no idea how many times I bounced between sanity and delirious disconnect, but it seemed to last only a few seconds at a time, at least the parts that I remember. What little time I had in my sane periods after recollecting all my thoughts were filled with shock and terror. I never intended to go this far. What's coming next? Is this the end of the peak or the end of me? As if by divine foresight, I managed to take the exact correct dosage for my metabolism to just peek into the maw of insanity. Within only 30 minutes, the delirium subsided. I didn't go anywhere or do anything. I'm still lying down. Thinking back on it, I doubt my body even could move, if whoever or whatever took control of my empty mind wanted it to. I was still exhausted, still battling waves of nausea, still in massive pain, and merely breathing was still a laborious task. I don't know if I could have even spoken. But before I could breathe a sigh of relief from regaining firm control of my mind, the reality of my situation came back to me. I hear the whispers of young girls, but with a sinister edge. I'm starting to hear the sounds of tiny bare feet running around behind the closed living room door. When I look at the tiny gap at the bottom of the door, I see several feet worth of pale white toes. I hear one of the grudge girls run to the opposite side of the house behind the door, then moments later run back. Then, suddenly, the sound of a saw cutting through wood. The sawing stops and the sound of metal clattering on the ground rings through my ears like a gunshot. Then I hear multiple small palms sliding across the door. They're trying to push it open. I wait in silence for the next horror. I hear more pitter-patter, then the sound of a wooden table being dragged across the floor. It stopped right behind the door, and I see through a gap at the top of the door a tiny sliver of a head covered in long black unkempt hair just barely poking up. I look away. Suddenly, I hear the crystal clear sound of the door sliding wide open. I snap my head back. The door is closed. I hear one girl run off and return, then hear the jangling of keys and the sound of unlocking. The door remains shut. I hear several small hands scratch the door with their fingernails. I hear gentle knocking from tiny knuckles. Then, out of the cloud of indistinct murmurs, I hear a whisper call out like a cursed bell in perfect clarity. "Let me in," it taunted. Every attempt fails, but is terrifying nonetheless. They might yet get through. Anything is possible in this hellish reality. 3.5 hours in, the girls continue to run about in the apartment, creaking the door open when I'm not looking. Then, finally, it subsides. Everything subsides. I would feel relieved if I weren't so exhausted it hurt. I look at the door again and notice a massive grunge mark across the white paint. It's pale, so I wonder if I just haven't ever noticed it before. It's right at the level of the doorknob and looks like the kind of rubbed-in dirt marks that a door would get from being pushed open thousands of times. Then suddenly, it moves. It starts morphing into different shapes. I look away and look back again quickly. Now it's in a different spot. My relief from passing peak appears to be short-lived. I feel like I'm not out of the woods yet if I can see hallucinations this vivid. I try looking away, then looking at it again. Now there's 2 identical grunge marks. I reset yet again, trying vainly to purge my vision of hallucinations. It's in a new spot again. I watch it this time as it starts morphing into different shapes. It turns into a fist, then points a finger at the TV. I look over at the TV. It surfaced a semi-glossy black mirror and see a room much larger than the living room I'm in. I see the reflection of my legs, and the couch, and the divider wall between the living room and outside door. I also see things that aren't a reflection. I see an armchair in the non-existent space between the couch and the divider, and on the other side of the divider, I should see the door to the outside, but I only see pitch black. I look back at the chair and see a figure. He looks at me. I ask him mentally what he wants, but he walks away and disappears into the darkness on the other side of the mirrored divider. I lean over to peer through the darkness and a hallway appears. It's long, way longer than possible, with double doors and 2 windows letting daylight stream in. I lean back as I feel a sudden rush of fear of my exposed back, as well as the crawling, tingling, and jabbing intensify without my back pressed to the couch. The figure reappears suddenly, only to do the same. I don't have it in me to sit up again. I see what appears to be the reflection of my legs, except it's oriented completely wrong. Mirror me is way closer to the TV, nearly touching it, and also underneath it somehow. I see hands reach out and stretch, and the legs follow suit, stretching and bending. The illusion of reflection is lost as soon as it starts moving of its own accord. The movement is so crisp and smooth, it's the most realistic visual hallucination I have seen yet. Then suddenly, like a Rubik's Cube, patterns on my fake mirror's PJ pants slide in several directions at once as the reflection snaps back to reality. The reflection of my feet, the couch, and blanket. Then it repeats. I see the armchair figure multiple times, sometimes shape-shifting, but growing more and more indistinct every time. I hear my roommate come out of her room suddenly and start doing dishes. I can tell it's real because it's seemingly louder than the hallucinations. She turns on the dryer, then goes back to her room. Then she's out again and walks all the way to the door, pulling it open. My heart leaps into my throat. She's going to let the grunge girls out. The door doesn't move. Then I hear the bathroom sink turn on. I guess my foggy brain misheard the footsteps. I can still tell the difference between hallucination and reality if I focus. The roommate finishes up and returns to her room. More pitter-patter from the bare feet of the hallucinated girls. The roommate comes back out of her room, walking all the way to the door, and stops. Then I hear the sink turn on. It seems that when my real roommate walks around, my hallucinations hijack the sound to make themselves seem more real. I can just barely tell the difference between the fake footsteps and the real ones by how loud they are. It is only later, after reviewing my notes, that I realize a scary truth. At the time, I could barely concentrate on anything other than fighting off the unending fear, fatigue, and nausea in between bouts of head fog, so I thought nothing of it. But why my roommate would go back and forth between her room and the bathroom nearly 8 times. I was annoyed at her in the moment, but now I realize she didn't. I couldn't tell the difference between real and hallucinated sounds, not at all. 4 hours in, my mind has slowly been clearing since the peak, and I now have enough focus to try and test my typing ability. I look back at it a half an hour later and see that it is legible, and still is after looking at it 48 hours later. I notice a couple of my keyboard letters are slightly blurry, but this will pass shortly. I also notice that the lyrics of the music I am listening to get heavily jumbled and nonsensical if I turn the volume down, like my mind puts random words together when it can't hear what's being said in perfect clarity. I am truly balancing on the very edge of insanity. I break through the mental exhaustion for a moment and am sound enough mind to resume typing my notes from memory, as I remember everything in visceral detail. My laptop battery dies, so I decide to move back to my bedroom. I am still stalked by the grudge girls and the trip from the living room, which takes a lot out of my psyche. I am left exhausted, dizzy, and unable to concentrate when I arrive. I suddenly hear the sound of a man peeing loudly in the toilet, which is impossible as there are no men in my apartment, only myself and my roommate. I hear the phantom man finish and the distinct sound of footsteps moving towards my door, then the terrifyingly realistic sound of jingling keys, followed by the sound of a key sliding into the padlock and the bolt lock sliding open. The door remains still as I hold my breath. I hear this auditory hallucination happen repeatedly, but my exhausted, foggy brain isn't able to learn that it's fake, and every occurrence takes a little more out of my energy reserves. Sometimes when the man inevitably fails to unlock my door, he starts scraping loudly with his fingernails. I occasionally hear the sound of what seems like 100 mice in a giant swarm in the kitchen. One time, I suddenly hear the crystal clear sound of my bedroom door opening. My heart leaps into my throat as I snap my eyes to the door, but it is closed. Another time, I not only hear it opening, but see it open in my peripheral vision. I again snap my eyes directly at the door as my heart rate skyrockets, and again, the door remains locked and closed. The phantom man seems to be gone. When I look at my laptop to resume typing, the gap at the bottom of my door expands in my peripheral vision from an inch to several feet high. I see a gigantic spider come out of the massive black hole and crawl across the floor to my chair. When it appears on top of my chair, it is no longer a spider, but a cat. When I look directly at it, the cat disappears. I also see ghost spiders at the edges of my vision, but I cannot see any hallucinations in my direction vision anymore. My room has suddenly brightened, and I feel the darkness in my mind has lifted. After another 10 minutes, the mind fog returns. It appears it was just a valley between waves of mind fog and fatigue. My throat feels not only sore, but raw. It feels like it has been damaged badly with a caustic substance. I see the faint but full-color hallucination of a snake-like Japanese dragon in my window, wearing a humanoid Japanese demon mask. It moves slowly from the window into my room, growing more monotone as it crosses from my peripheral into my direct, where it becomes a ghost outline, and then disappears on the opposite side of my peripheral vision. I also see in my peripheral a giant spider come out of the enlarged hole in the bottom of my door, crawl to my chair, and, this time, turn into a hedgehog. A super intense wave of head fog hits me. I have difficulty maintaining a linear order of events when attempting to accomplish any task, even one as simple as forming a thought. I just now notice how sweaty I am. Earlier, near the beginning of my trip, I measured my heart rate at double my resting. It is still 60% higher than my resting rate right now. After returning from the washroom, I realize I've gone to the washroom over 10 times since the beginning. I still have no appetite. I have to force myself to eat and can still only get down liquid nutrition. I am typing notes on my laptop when suddenly, my entire field of vision jolts and blurs a little, and an entire wall of text in all caps appears instantaneously in front of me. My mind reels from the sudden time jump, and I feel a gut-wrenching, cold, clammy fear grip my chest as I read the words. I am hate. I am evil. I am cruel. I am selfish. Dozens and dozens of sentences have been written in a time of which I am not even aware past. A screed of uncensored, unrestrained messages, like a demonic manifesto, fills my entire screen. Is this what being possessed feels like? Regardless of what is or isn't real, the writing before me is, and my memory of writing it is totally non-existent, and I am left shaken and terrified. A black ball of spidery legs rushes across the floor incredibly quick. All of my visual hallucinations have been subsiding over the last few hours. It has been almost 5 hours since the end of my peak, so I expect that the trip is nearly over. Suddenly, I'm starting to see specks and glitches. I feel a rush of anxiety, hear hallucinated voices, and the light in my bedroom grows brighter. Am I starting a second trip? I can't possibly have redosed. I have remembered nearly everything in my trip so far in perfect clarity, and even in the remote chance that I do have memory blackouts, it takes nearly half an hour to gather all the supplies needed, fill capsules with Benzy concentrate, and measure the amount. Not to mention that I have absolutely no desire to keep this nightmare going any longer. My chest pounds at the thought of things ramping up again, regardless of how remote it seems. My vision blurs and jolts again at the discombobulating feeling of another time jump, though again I have not moved. It appears I was possessed only for a fraction of a second this time, as whatever evil taking over me had only enough time to enter a line break. I am most definitely having another trip. All of the mental and emotional effects are intensifying, much more than they should be 5 hours post-peak. It has been about 7 hours since I had caffeine, so it must be wearing off, allowing the Benzy to surge back to full strength. I contemplate having more, but I don't want to strain my heart any more than it already is, so I choose to simply ride it out. My bedroom turns dark and foreboding, so I decide to take refuge in the living room once again. I see a translucent, drifting thread in the corner of my eyelashes, a single thread of spiderweb, and pull it off with my fingers. I feel nothing, and the hallucination vanishes. The furniture starts to creak much too loudly and often. I've left the door to the living room open, and I hear the distinct noise of someone walking around in bare feet. She sniffs her nose like it's runny, dumps a tiny amount of water into the sink drain, and starts to walk toward the door. Fear grips my chest like a vice. The roommate hasn't returned yet. I'm still alone in the apartment, or at least I should be. I rush to the door and swing it shut, ignoring the glimpses of figures down the hallway. I start to feel the familiar sensation of a cold phantom wind blowing across each and every finger individually. All of my hairs are standing on end. I'm hearing lots of auditory hallucinations and seeing visuals in my peripheral. Above me, I see a vivid double of the light fixture, but when I turn my eyes up to look at the ceiling, it's gone. My ears are ringing, a deafeningly piercing high-pitched whine, just like last time before my first peek. I hear the sound of a table or a stool scraping across the kitchen floor, coming towards the door. Instead of stopping though, it turns around and goes back to the kitchen, then starts going around in circles. My mind must have been getting extremely foggy as I hear the circular dragging seem to move vertically and over me to the ceiling, yet don't question the realness of it at the time. I feel breathing across my ear again. I feel tingling all over my body and a sudden bad taste in my mouth. The head fog, nausea, and dizziness return extremely strongly. I hear what sounds like a body falling on the floor on the other side of the wall, and the table shakes a little in the corner of my eye. I hear quiet knocking at the living room door. The lyrics to the music I am listening to are getting jumbled again. My chest is in extreme pain again, and breathing becomes very difficult. My mouth and throat are horribly dry. A wave of anxiety hits me like a train. I hear my neighbor outside yell angrily and a car alarm go off, as though he caught a robber trying to steal his car. Was it real? Pretty sure not, but there's no way to know for sure. I'm in a valley between the waves of effects. I instinctively want this calm to last, but I know it will not. In fact, whenever I become aware that I am in a valley, it's usually a sign that it is going to get much worse very soon. I look at the shadow of my own hand against the back of the couch and feel something strange. It is as if I don't recognize the shadow as my own. It feels nearly exactly the same as when I had a moment of temporary prosopagnosia when drinking absinthe and couldn't recognize my own reflection as my face. The ear ringing is getting louder with each wave. Am I feeling time dilation or just near delirious confusion? I notice I'm making very odd movements with my hands, like a nervous tic that I've developed just now. 11 hours in, I hear extremely believable knocking on the outside door. 2 firm knocks, as if with the metal top of a cane, repeated 6 or 7 times. It's the loudest, clearest, and most believable of all the auditory hallucinations I've had so far. It can't possibly be real. That door faces the backyard. The only people who would enter there are the landlords, and they always call before entering, yet I cannot stop believing it is real. I hold very still and pretend I'm not at home, despite the living room light being on. After a while, I hear the sound of the entryway landing creaking behind the divider that stands between me and the outside door, as though someone is walking in. The creaking stops just behind the edge of the divider wall. I feel as though a dark, regal spirit is waiting for me to invite them in. I don't know whether to get up and do so, unleashing who knows what kind of malice into my house, or to refuse and risk the consequences. I decide it's better to not invite unknown spirits into my home. After another period, I hear the sound of the base of a cane angrily striking the sidewalk outside my door, then clacking footsteps walking swiftly away. Have I brought a worse fate upon myself for being rude? I feel it's better to stick with the evil I know, but perhaps there is no good choice. I hear another hallucination. Above me, the old man's stroller drags loudly across the floor, and the sharp sound of high heels follows behind. It must be real. It is too loud to be a hallucination, yet I've never heard anyone with high heels visit the tenants upstairs. Then it starts moving backwards, the two phantoms retracing their steps, then behind me, then diagonally down one wall, then down another until at ground level. Another pause between waves. All of the symptoms start to subside, and I gather my things and return to my bedroom as my laptop is almost out of battery again. In my room, I am able to turn down the lights to a dimmer setting without much anxiety. I spend the next 7 hours editing my notes as I battle through fatigue and mind fog. It's a double-edged sword. I'm distracted from the physical world and all the hallucinated demons and spirits, but remembering and writing intricate details about such dark and terrifying experiences while I'm still not sober. I have vivid bouts of auditory hallucinations and visuals in my peripheral throughout editing, and even now I know if I let my eyes sit in one spot too long, I'll start seeing things more vividly until I see it in my direct vision. My eyes are starting to hurt. I feel a migraine coming. I'm ready to fall asleep. I turn my computer off, then turn off the lights. I immediately hear the sound of a soft thud and a small mouth inhale, like a child jumping. I sense a grudge girl right next to my bed, inches from my face. I turn the lights back on. I feel nauseous. My stomach gurgles, faint at first, then growling louder. It keeps growling, way too many times. Is it a hallucination, or to be expected after ingesting a toxic amount of chemicals and then not eating for an entire day? I have no way of knowing what is or isn't real when it comes to sounds, and I am most definitely still not of sound mind. As I type this, I can see a plastic Easter Island head statue standing impossibly sideways on the side of my desk that disappears when I look straight at it and reappears when I resume typing. I hear the faint sound of a massive hellhound breathing in its sleep under my bed. I finish typing, just about to get ready to fall asleep, when suddenly I hear a familiar, foreboding sound, a deafening, high-pitched whine. The third peak is coming. I turn off my computer again and try to quickly fall asleep before I can start seeing, hearing, and feeling things. The first hour I can only fall asleep for 5 minutes at a time. I'm still seeing vivid CEVs, though not nearly as bad as during the first come-up. It always starts in a place that feels small and cramped, like a movie short happening on a tiny set, and it always ends up returning to the same pattern, rushing at 200 miles per hour through a long, winding, unending tunnel. The dream keeps getting more real, dark, and sinister until I'm shocked awake. One time I close my eyes and I see a magician. He opens a red curtain, just barely big enough for me to walk through. I see dozens of curtains opening up inside, one after the other, each one darker as the light fades into the distance. I'm rushing through them. Now it's not just the shadows making the curtains darker. The fabric itself on each consecutive curtain is a deeper red than the previous one, until they're all black now, and they start to get more and more vivid. I am only in the curtain tunnel for a couple seconds before I rush to a tiny black tent. The magician is there. The room is lit dimly as if from only a few candles, even though I can't see the source of the light. Someone is tied up in a chair with a plastic mask that has 3 holes, one for each eye and a third in their forehead. The magician grabs a giant razor-sharp knitting needle and stabs it into their head through skin and bone. I start to feel a sudden stabbing pain in my own head, which makes me jump awake. The dream felt like it lasted less than a minute. Another dream, and I am in a tiny dimly lit room again, with old-fashioned light bulbs on a wire lining the top edge of 2 of the walls. The low ceiling is a thick, opaque tarp and blows in the strong wind outside. I feel like we must be near the seaside. It's nighttime. There's a person standing next to a small table. There's only standing room between the edges of the table and the walls. They're checking the light bulbs. They bend over towards the table, and suddenly everything starts spinning, like full vision, full color tracers. My entire world is a circular pattern, then suddenly I am rushing through it as it turns into a tunnel. The tunnel is striped, black and gray, and I'm falling at breakneck speed, though I don't feel any vertigo. The walls start to gradually become more clear until they're glass, with black metal between each pane. Outside, I see I am underwater. It's getting darker as I fall deeper and deeper until there's only pitch black. Suddenly, the tunnel is no longer made of glass. It's made of skulls. I'm rushing through the open maw of 1,000,000 giant consecutive skulls. Outside the skull tunnel, I see a deep red glow get brighter and brighter as I rush down the tunnel into hell. I jump awake. Again, the dream only lasted a couple minutes. Another dream, and I am looking at the sidewalk in the city. I know it's daytime and that there's a bustling city around me, but I can't see anything except this tiny 10-foot square space of the sidewalk. There's half of a public bench sticking into the scene. The other half exists out of frame. Under the shadow of the bench on the concrete is a bunch of tiny baby chickens for some reason. They are gray instead of yellow. Suddenly, a large dog rushes into the scene, devouring the small birds in a gruesome, bloody mess. It finishes its gory meal in only a few bites and looks up at me. Its head is flat and it has no eyes, and then I realize it has two bottom jaws instead of a top and bottom one. Its head is just a giant mouth. It's no regular dog, it's a hellhound. It sniffs me, then opens its maw wide and jumps at me, and I see a long dark tunnel lined with teeth before jumping awake. Every time I wake up, my heart is racing, and I start to hear the ringing in my ears, followed by crawling, tingling sensations and movements in my peripheral vision. I try to get back to sleep before the fear can keep me awake. After a restless hour of 5-minute naps, I start to have longer dreams, and as a result, sleep for longer periods. 10 minutes, then 15, then 30. As the dawn starts to light up my room through the window, I feel safer closing my eyes, and the light seems to cast a calming mood over my dreams. I wake up 3 hours later feeling almost sober and a little bit rested for the first time in what feels like eternity. It's daylight again. I check the time on my phone. I try to close my blinds to sleep better, but still feel the cold, clammy grip of Benzydamine grip me in the dark, so I turn it up again, then return to sleeping. The periods of rest between waking gradually increase over the next few hours and feel more restful. 4 hours later, I wake up and decide to stay up this time, feeling fine. My mouth tastes like chalky, acidic chemicals. I warm up some solid food and pour hot sauce on it to burn out the terrible taste. I feel my throat burning like I've just downed a small spoon of bleach, still raw from the Benzy. I keep eating and it gradually burns less. I don't feel any nausea. I hear a loud bump and a metallic clatter in the kitchen, like pop cans or spray cans, I can't tell. My heart leaps at the noise, still jumpy. Was it real though? Am I still hearing things that vividly? I check my table and find a hair that hours ago I wasn't sure was real. It seems my vision is clear. I hear the distant and faint sound of the microwave warming food. Then I think I hear it beeping the finished sound while still running. That's not right. The beeping seems to fade as if my understanding that it's an illusion causes it to. Then I realize I've never been able to hear the low hum of the microwave warming food from my bedroom. It's the other way around. The beeping was real. Or was any of it real? I hear another loud thud, another metallic clatter in the kitchen. I glance at the edge of the bed and something catches my eye. The black sheet has a ghost outline against the white wall, a classic Benzy illusion. I am still seeing things. I close my blinds. In the pitch black, I start to see indistinct shapes like partial illusions and tiny sudden movements at the very distant corners of my vision. I hear the microwave beeping again and go investigate, testing my reality for the first time. It's real. The roommate was warming food. I resume typing. With my light dimmed to a deep dark red, I can clearly tell now that I'm definitely still seeing things in the corner of my eyes, albeit faint and distinct. In areas of pitch black shadows, I see the blackness morph and spider-like legs reach out just a couple of inches. In bright areas, I see small, super faint ghost spiders dash about. I resume editing my notes. I'm hearing the high-pitched ringing again. I know the hallucinations aren't coming back, so it's no longer terrifying, but still loud and slightly painful now. Was it always painful? Probably, but I was in a constant state of agony during the trip, from physical pain, extreme exhaustion, soreness, and nausea, so I probably didn't notice something so mild. I also seem to still have difficulty seeing things for what they are when I have music playing. After writing a few paragraphs, I'll notice several bright red underlines appear, all at once, typos that I didn't see at first. It is now 52 hours and 30 minutes in, and I finished the trip report. I still see the slight hint of moving things at the edge of my vision, the occasional leg of a ghost spider, and I have the uncanny sensation that I can feel the darkness of shadows, like the contrast of my vision is up just slightly. Even the pupils of my eyes, though they are of regular size, they look blacker than I remember, and I feel just a little tinge of anxiety looking at them, even in the bright light. Benzy is potentiated by darkness, so it must be a residual effect. Benzydamine is unlike any other deliriant. It's not like DPH, it's not like tropane alkaloids, antihistamines, or Z-drugs. There is no mental or emotional anesthetic during a Benzy trip to soothe the horror. Every feeling is in fact amplified. The impending doom, crushing despair, and literally paralyzing anxiety only increases with the dose. Benzy also plays one's own fears against themselves. My mind was constantly racing through dozens of fears, monsters, and scenarios, creating new ones every minute during the entire trip. Trying not to focus on them is like trying to walk across a disturbed anthill without stepping on a single ant. All it takes is pausing on a single dark thought for 1 second too long, and it starts to creep into the physical world. Caffeine is an extremely effective Benzy suppressant, but will magnify the stress on the heart. The visual hallucinations would often sync with real sounds, while the auditory hallucinations would meld, play off, or mimic real sounds happening in the moment, making the latter impossible to tell apart. I don't even bother drinking plain water, it has no effect. Coconut water, sports drinks, and/or electrolytes are essential for staying hydrated. To say that frequent urination is an effect of Benzy would be an understatement. My liver was clearly desperately trying to purge my body of poison. I lost a massive amount of liquid that I couldn't possibly keep up with, and with my sore throat, mind fog, and time dilation, even taking small sips was a significant undertaking. I'm still replenishing my body liquids now. Benzy greatly inhibits alcohol. I only drink once or twice a year and can be prone to blacking out. On the night after the end of the trip, I went out and had a lot to drink with friends, far more than I should have been able to handle, and both felt very aware and suffered no impairment to my vision. As a final note, I cannot possibly fit everything I saw, felt, and heard during every minute of my experience into this already massive trip report. I experienced so much that, despite having only a few short memory blanks, I simply couldn't fit everything into my memory. Even now, I'm having things come back to me, details that were overwhelmed in the moment by the pain, exhaustion, and fear. I have a clear memory of an unbroken linear series of events, but there are several times when a single sense or emotion was so strong that I cannot recall what else was going on. I talked briefly about this in another thread the other day, and it had been a long time since I had thought about it, so I thought it may help someone if I tell this story. This happened to me almost 20 years ago now. 20 years later, it's still vivid in my mind. It was so traumatic. The backstory. In 1998, I moved from smoking pot to doing crystal methamphetamine. I remember the first few times. I felt like God. I felt like I had discovered some secret, that the rest of humanity were weaker beings needing to sleep. I was full of life, full of confidence and social. When I ended the nights out and went home, I'd lie there so wired I couldn't even blink. In my head running over fantasy scenarios and dreaming whilst awake. Dawn would come and I'd drift off to sleep. I had dropped out of work and was living off benefits which I used completely to buy crystal. It felt so good. This carried on for a while. I got confident, got a girlfriend. I hadn't had one for a few years. Anyway, my confidence spiraled into egotistical wankerdom. I believed the grains of white crystal I held in my pocket were magic. Then one night, this illusion swung violently into a nightmare. That night, I hadn't slept or eaten anything proper in days. I was wired to fuck already. I met my girlfriend, who in reality was a drugged up skank from a rough family, and we went to this shitty local pub she liked. I went into the toilets thinking, this place is shit, I'll liven it up a bit. I took out my baggie and proceeded to bomb double what I usually took. It seemed to hit almost instantly. I was in the cubicle and the rush was pure terror and anxiety. I sat there and heard a few guys come into the toilet. They were talking about me. They were plotting to beat me up. I sat there with my heart pounding and eyes bulging, thinking, what will I do? What will I do? I go out cautiously and there's nobody there. I go into the pub area and my mates are playing pool and drinking. I try to pretend I'm okay, but it must have been so obvious I wasn't. As one of my friends commented, "You need to calm down on that stuff." My girlfriend said, "Let's get out of here, you look crazy." So we went to her house, which was just over the road. She said, "I'll make you a brew to help you calm down." I sat there and my mind was racing. She was in on it. I never drink brews. She was trying to poison me, or slip me some downers so the people in the pub could beat me up. I sat in the lounge on my own, and looking around, I saw some tools her dad had out. He was installing laminate floor. There was a hammer and a few other bits. Then I saw it, a retractable Stanley knife. I picked it up quietly and slipped it into my pocket, not even thinking what the fuck I was going to do. I just knew if these fuckers came, I was going to defend myself. My girlfriend came in and gave me the brew. I put it down and obviously didn't drink that poison shit. The curtains were drawn, but I saw the shadows outside of a group of people. They were coming. I needed to get the fuck out of there. My girlfriend starts coming on to me. I pretended I was into it. Then, seizing the element of surprise, I push her off, jump up, and shoot out of her house. I sprinted the fastest I have ever ran. Her house overlooked some fields at the back that led onto the woods. I just ran and ran and ran. Once I was a good distance away, I looked back and they were coming. I saw them coming, fast, so I turned and carried on sprinting. On that night, I think I'd have given Usain Bolt a run for his money. I reached the woods and literally felt sick at the thought of going in. It must have been about midnight now, and it was pitch black. There was no place else to go. I hurdled the fence and ran in. I found a densely overgrown spot and hid behind a tree, my heart pounding in my chest. My hand in my pocket slid out the blade of the knife. I stayed quiet for what seemed like hours. I saw them, their dark silhouettes and hooded heads. They looked big, like bodybuilder types, and there were loads of them. I heard them whistle to each other in some sort of code. Then, the worst thing ever happened. The clouds cleared and the full moon shone bright light down, illuminating the woods and revealing where I was. I saw them moving between trees. They were playing a game. They were hunting me. "Just get it over with. What have I done to you? Why are you doing this?" I screamed into the dark. But still, they didn't come. They just sort of circled around me in the woods. My mind raced to every person I might have pissed off, to think who could be behind this. I knew whoever it was, to have this many people out here in the woods, they were serious. "Come on, come and do it then. I've got a fucking knife," I literally screamed into the dark woods. It was probably now about 2 a.m. The shadows just kept darting between trees, only now they looked small. Not even my height, I'm not very tall. The moon had gone back behind the clouds, but then, all of a sudden, a bright white beam came down from the moon to the middle of the woods. My mind then, and I remember with clarity, thought, I cannot believe this is an alien conspiracy. Oh my god, I'm going to be abducted. I'll disappear and no one will ever know what happened. It sounds ludicrous in hindsight, but the terror I felt in that moment. I pulled out the knife. I thought, no, I'd rather fucking kill myself than be taken by aliens. The time now must have been about 4 a.m. because it literally started to grow lighter. I looked around in horror, the blade of the Stanley knife to my wrist. It was like my whole soul screamed no. The light came fast. I looked around. There was no one, no beings, no people, just me. I was freezing. My eyes were literally bulging out of my skull. A moment of clarity came smashing through all the horror. I collapsed to my knees and looked at myself. I was covered in mud. I'd actually cut into my arm and blood ran down my hand. I was filthy. I sat there with my head in my hands crying for ages. What had my life become? I pulled myself up and walked home. All the way, paranoid thoughts rushed through my head. People in cars stared at me. Men in white vans were going to pull up and bundle me into them. The reality was, it was about 5 a.m. There were hardly any cars about. The bad trip lingered. I had to force myself not to look at the shadow people. I remember one vividly leaning on the bonnet of a car, cradling a baseball bat. I forced myself to look down and just get home. Now, the reality that it was a bad trip was a thought I could understand. I felt distraught. I got home, got into bed, and slept for 2 full days. I got up after that 48 hours, and I made a serious attempt to kill myself. My mom found me unconscious. I was in hospital for 3 days. I woke up, discharged myself, and you know what? I went and scored some more meth. Please, if you are young or any age, don't do that shit. It is evil. It is the worst, most horrible thing. It will make you do terrible things to people you love. It will make you do terrible things to yourself. It's just not worth it. I want to add something to the story that I missed. I had a best friend from back then. He too went through a lot of what I did. We were best friends, but the meth eroded that as we each began shutting down. I saw him a few months ago, the first time in about 15 years. It was all good. When I commented on how crazy it was back then, he was walking off in his own direction and turned and said exactly the truth. It always stays with you, and it does. I live in a third world country where drug laws are strict, so finding LSD, shrooms, or any other drug is near impossible. My friends and I used to smoke weed that we harvested from the wild, but the weed was getting boring. We were young and dumb, so when I heard some kids talking about huffing butane to get high, we became interested. We bought butane from a store. It was pretty cheap. Then my friend pulled out a big plastic bag and started pushing the tips of the butane in front of it, releasing gas into the bag. There was liquid butane at the bottom of it that didn't vaporize, which means we all took big hits. On the first hit, my body felt warm and comforting. When I exhaled the butane, my voice was very low, as were my friends. I started to feel a vibrating sensation in my head, like a frequency. There was a letter that kept vibrating in my head repeatedly. I could only feel, hear, and see that specific letter. Trip number 1. Butane highs are short, so I grabbed the bag and took a long, nice huff. That was a mistake. I suddenly teleported to a fantasy world or another dimension, I don't know. There was a wizard that kind of looked like the Ice King from Adventure Time, but he was static. What I mean is, he was just a statue that floated around and shouted something like King's Order to me. I got teleported to a green field where there was a small table and humanoid children-like figures sitting around it. They had no faces, but were talking to each other. Then the Ice King-like wizard shouted again, and I turned into their dinner on the table. Oh my god, that was my first hallucination. It was scary, but I didn't know that it was nothing compared to the next trips. After a day, I bought butane and left home alone. I was excited to trip alone, sitting in the bathroom, filling the bag with butane, and taking long huffs. Trip number 2. During this trip, a strange geometric entity flew through the bathroom door. It was in a sitting position, but flying, with the head shaped like a pyramid on top of a cube, and a rectangular body, amongst other shapes. Terrified by this entity, I cast some sort of spell, and then rod-like things grew out the wall, penetrating the bathroom. Some of them even penetrated through me, and they kept growing, filling the room more and more. The pain became unbearable, and I thought to myself, this is how I'm going to die, as I closed my eyes. The entity then hijacked my brain and entered my head saying, I don't like your thoughts. Die, 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 die. It started poking holes in my mind, which was irresistible, and my thoughts slowly chipped away until everything turned completely black. Trip number 3. On another day, alone in the bathroom with the bag, I huffed a few big hits, and a euphoric feeling kicked in. The room started getting hot, and I left the butane on the floor. When I looked at it, it was bursting into fire. Panicked, I tried to get it out of the room, but the door was locked, and in my intoxicated state, I couldn't open it. The room temperature kept rising, causing everything around me to melt. The washing machine, shower curtains, and even the toilet. Looking at my legs, I saw that my slippers had melted, and I felt the heat in my melting flesh. My legs turned into skeletons from the heat, unable to hold my body weight, and I collapsed onto the floor, hitting my head on the sink before waking up. Trip number 4. The other day, I thought that changing my environment would lead me to a good trip, but it didn't. It started with huffing a little and feeling the effects, but not tripping. Then I took a big hit and started seeing my friends, girlfriend, and parents all around me, looking at me disappointed. It was weird, like it was reality, but I felt slight discomfort around my eyes. When I touched my eyes, I felt little devil creatures covering them, making me see things. I ripped them off, thinking it would end, but when I looked at the floor, I saw a stick figure with a face like a really old man morphing out of it. It started screaming and lunging at me. I was running like a kid, screaming at the top of my lungs, trying to escape the stick figure. It was hitting me as I ran. I fell on the floor, curled up, and started crying. When the hallucinations ended, my home looked like total chaos, and my body was sore everywhere. From that day on, I never touched butane again. I developed PTSD from all the bad trips, always afraid of something and getting scared easily. After every session of butane, I experienced throwing up, dizziness, headache, depression, appetite loss, and inability to think straight for about 20 to 30 minutes. After a few years, I started researching inhalants and realized that I had destroyed a chunk of my brain cells and lost a few IQ points. One of my friends died. Doctors said his organs were frozen due to huffing so much butane. I was very lucky. Please don't do inhalants. Just smoke weed or get drunk. It is not worth it. It was only my second time huffing butane. The first time I tried it, it didn't do anything to me. I was driving and huffing at the same time. The butane made me pass out, and when I woke up, I was in a car wreck. I was on the wrong side of the road. My car and the other car were completely totaled, and there were ambulances and police cars everywhere. When I first came to, I had no idea where I was or what was going on, and I was in so much pain I couldn't move. It all felt like a really, really bad dream, and I wish it was. The paramedics put a neck brace on me, put an oxygen tube in my nose, put me on a stretcher, and took me to the hospital. I had to get 8 stitches in the back of my head because when I crashed, the speaker in the back of my car flew forward and cut my head all the way to the skull. My collarbone and part of my chest were burned and bruised from my seatbelt, but I'm glad I was wearing it. I wasn't hurt very seriously, but I was lucky. I found out that the other car was being driven by a 17-year-old girl and her little brother had been in the passenger seat. They didn't die, but they were hurt worse than I was. I felt so bad and so stupid. I never meant to hurt anybody. When I was in high school, I was part of a toxic friend group of stoners, drug dealers, and drug users. I used to skip class more than I'd like to admit so that I could have smoking sessions and get high on various drugs. We would smoke anywhere. We smoked huge blunts and ripped bong tokes in broad daylight in the front parking lot, inside vehicles parked there, underneath a camera positioned directly above our joint roto, and in the tree line between the soccer fields while people were attending gym class in the fields beside us. We were ruthless juveniles, and most of the people I still know from those days have grown out of our drug-using phase, except weed. As mentioned, we would smoke anywhere and everywhere, no matter how heat-scored the location was. However, sometimes we would want to smoke in peace, and our favorite, most sentimental spot to smoke was in the forest, in a place we called the Ravine. We were not the ones who named this place. It was a tradition passed on from 3 generations of people who attended the high school before us and used it as a smoke spot. When we were at the Ravine, it was always a bong festival, and 90% of the people smoked poppers. However, I had never tried a popper before, and didn't want to because I didn't like tobacco. During this era, concentrated 50mg nicotine salt vapes such as Juuls had not yet been popularized, and everyone would use box mods with vape juice containing 3 to 12 milligrams of nicotine potency, including myself. The Ravine was often packed with 30 or more people, but my circle of friends were the regulars, and therefore we were the ones who got there before everyone, and this meant we had chairs to sit in and protection within our clique. The days when the Ravine was packed were usually during celebrations like April 20th, otherwise known as 420. It was very common for local gangs to come down to the Ravine and act shady for a while until they found someone to rob, and they would take what they wanted, usually from the irregulars standing around with their backs facing them. One day at the Ravine, part of my circle gathered for a session. It was a normal session for me at first, paranoid and psychosis-ridden, as usual, until a person I considered a friend at the time offered to pack me a free bong toke, so of course, without hesitation, I said yes. I handed him my bowl piece and sat there with my racing paranoid thoughts, tweaking when he handed me my bowl piece and his bong. I didn't normally rip massive tokes because weed was expensive and I would run out quickly, so when he handed the bong over to me, I was practically drooling and frothing by the mouth because when I laid my eyes on the bowl piece, it was packed to the rim with weed on the top. Without hesitation, I lit the bowl up, which must have been the biggest toke I had ever taken yet. As the weed began to cherry, I began ripping on the bong so hard I kissed the fish and I snapped that bowl with fury all in one breath. As soon as the massive cloud of smoke hit my lungs, I became intensely sick. I exhaled and almost dropped the bong, and the guy who packed it caught it out of my hands. It was at this moment that I realized the bowl piece was laced with 90% tobacco batch, or about half a cigarette underneath the 10% of weed blanketed on top. I then lost my motor control, slumped back into my chair, and had the most painful trip of my life. When I leaned back, I began hallucinating because my vision was so blurry, and I felt as if I was on a roller coaster spinning in circles at maximum G-force. I was in a world of sickness and pain, and completely dissociated from the crowd of people laughing in hilarity together. They were in absolute whimsical hysterics as I sat there in the most torturous pain and extreme terrorist hallucinatory state of my life. I honestly can't remember what the hallucinations were like, but I do remember it was more of a spontaneous bodily sensation and dissociation from the extremely blurry vision. Eventually, everyone began to pack up their things, and the guy who packed the tokes said to me, "Come on, it's time to go." He then reached his arm out to me, grabbed my hand, and lifted me up out of the chair and onto my feet. My response was only one word: no, and I let go of his hand and became completely ataxic and tumbled back into my chair and began violently puking and dry heaving. They waited for me for 10 minutes so I can gain my composure, and after I was finished puking and was able to stand up, they all left me behind, alone to deal with it myself. I could not stand for the life of me, but I managed to make it step by step, holding on to things and trying to keep my balance, but continually collapsed in the soggy dirt. I managed to make it to the hill to get out of the ravine, and then I was faced with the challenge of ascending it. I was not wearing boots and had no traction, so I slowly and steadily crawled up the hill in agony. I finally made it to the top of the hill and stood up again. At this point, I was able to walk without collapsing. I was still slightly ataxic, but I wasn't tripping over my own feet anymore. As I staggered and stumbled my way out of the forest, I couldn't hold my torso up because I felt like I was carrying bags of sand on my shoulders or resisting gravitational pull that was stronger than earthly gravity. As I finally made it out of the forest and as I entered the subdivision, I must have looked like a literal zombie because of my balance, coordination, collapsed torso, and lack of motor function in my arms, so they were just drooping down as if I was nodding off while standing on fentanyl. I slowly trudged my way back to school and ran into an actual friend with compassion for me, so he skipped class with me after I told him what happened. When I walked with him, I began to regain my motor function and could walk in a slightly drunken manner. I finally made the endeavor of my lifetime all the way to the hockey arena across the road from school. I was so nauseous and baked that I had to sit down after walking what felt like a marathon. So when we got to the empty arena, we went into the bleachers and sat down on a couch that was up 2 flights of stairs. After sitting down for a while, I regained my balance and posture, but sat there with extreme nausea. For about 20 minutes we talked until all of a sudden I had the urge to puke. I managed to hold it in as I ran down the stairs until I opened the door to the public bathroom. When I opened the door, I instantly expelled a projectile of vomit all over the floor and continued to leave a trail of vomit all the way to the stalls, and by the time I got to the toilet, I had emptied my entire stomach content. None of the vomit made it into the toilet, but I continued to violently dry heave into the toilet for 5 minutes. After that, I left the bathroom and alarmed my friend that we had to leave immediately, so we ditched the place and didn't tell anyone. The janitor must have been furious when he saw the liters of stomach content all over the bathroom. This is a distant memory for me because it's been 5 years or so since this happened, and I can't remember the remainder of that day. What I do remember vividly is that this was the most pain I have ever endured in my life. If it were to happen now as an adult, I would have gone to a hospital because this was an emergency and my country has free healthcare. I had endeavored nicotine poisoning and was sick for days, recovered without any medical assistance and in secrecy from my parents. Before this experience, my first ever time trying a drug that was not weed, I was given 5 20-milligram Adderall pills, and without any tolerance or experience with hard drugs, I took them all. At the peak of the experience, I had felt the most euphoric bliss of my entire life, better than my first hit of crack, but following the peak, I crashed harder than I ever had, and I was tweaking. I stood in front of the toilet for 4 hours straight geeking in an attempt to piss. Once I gave up, I went back to my room and had the worst come down of my life and the most insane hallucinations and bodily sensations I have ever experienced, even from any psychedelic I have ever tried since. Needless to say, I had not learned back then, but I have been sober for a year now and have never been better as a side note. My point being is that my Adderall overdose was extremely painful, but it did not match the gut-wrenching nausea, torturous hallucinations, loss of all motor function, and the battle of making my way up the muddy hill after being abandoned and stranded to figure it out all for myself after being purposefully assaulted by a person I called my friend. I have also been in many fistfights, had an airbag burst in my face and break my nose. I've overdosed and had an amateur nurse ram a catheter in my dick without using any precision or care and without any sedation. All these experiences of pain never surpass a level of agony and torture I endured on the day I overdosed on nicotine. I am 23 years old. Last year I was having some mental health problems. I got in a fight with my older brother and my parents called the police on me and they took me to the mental health ward at the local hospital. It's not exactly my first time in the mental health ward. I've been there a bunch of times. Some would say I'm a violent person. I'm lucky I didn't end up in jail. Anyways, I ended up in the mental ward, and because I was off my medications, some antipsychotic which was a lot lighter than Clopixol, not to say it was light, they ordered me to be put on Form 5. Form 5 means you lose the right to self-determination regarding your mental health, because you apparently can't handle that responsibility, because you don't want to take a medication that ruins your ability to get an erection or get high when you smoke weed. More on that later. Anyways, me being me, I was kind of freaking out in the mental ward. I tried to appeal the doctor's decision and get out, but my appeal got rejected and I was stuck. I was not looking forward to what was about to happen. That didn't work, and I was still stuck in the mental ward, in isolation now. I must have pissed someone off though, because they decided to put me on Clopixol after that. Background on Clopixol: it's pretty much the strongest antipsychotic out there. I live in Canada, where it is not illegal. I got transferred out of that mental ward and into a dedicated mental hospital after that, as I was coming to grips with the fact that I would be strapped to a bed by security guards and injected in my ass with this antipsychotic substance called Clopixol, 200 to 400 milligrams every 1 or 2 weeks. It happened every week to my next door roommate while I was on the intensive care unit. He was an Irish guy who made up his mind that he would rather scream and fight like an animal before getting his injections. There wasn't much of a choice. I had a revelation. I could still get a head rush from a cigarette, right? I made up my mind right there. I was going to get through this by smoking cigarettes. That week I called my dad and he dropped off a carton of cigarettes for my stay in the hospital. I had a couple months to go. I've smoked before and I enjoyed it quite a bit. Vaping in particular was my thing. The head rush was kind of awesome, and cigarettes were an even more powerful experience than vaping. Considering they didn't allow vapes on the ward, I was happy to smoke cigarettes. It's not like I was a big health buff by that point. I was pretty much living just to smoke a cigarette. Also, on top of Clopixol injections, I was given a pretty high oral dose of lithium for depression and Seroquel, which is another antipsychotic, cause why not? Soon after my first injection, I got smoking privileges. I smoked my first cigarette, and boy, was that a breath of fresh air. Strangely though, I only experienced a head rush for my first cigarette of the day. It's like everyone after that was a dud. I didn't feel a thing. Something was up. Within a couple weeks, I couldn't feel any cigarette, not even the first of the day. I was convinced it was the lithium. I stayed smoking 8 cigarettes a day. Sometimes my doctor would move my dosages down and it gave me hope, doing untold damage to my lungs for no reward. I didn't get high off a single cigarette for the entire 3 months I was there, besides the first couple during my first 2 weeks. It was kind of like hell. As soon as I got out, I knew I wanted to get off the lithium, since that was what was preventing me from getting high off cigarettes, right? Also, my first day out, I went and bought a vape pen and tried to get high off of weed. That didn't work, and I was hardly surprised. Previous experience told me it was the antipsychotics, but I was hoping the antipsychotics were preventing me from getting high off weed, and the lithium was preventing me from getting high off cigarettes. In the back of my head, I knew it was the Clopixol doing both, but didn't want to think about that since my parents made it very clear that going off of my antipsychotics was out of the question. They took all my life savings. I couldn't even get out of town and away from them, and I was under a court order to take these antipsychotics anyways, so I was kind of fucked. But they did say that if I behaved for a while, they would let me get off the lithium. Another couple months go by. They let me off of it. Nothing changes. By now, I know it's the Clopixol, as it's the only drug I am on anymore, and I still can't get a head rush from a cigarette. I still think if I stop taking it, my ability to get high will come back. More on that later. Another couple months go by. One day I couldn't take it and I confronted my parents and cited a previous suicide attempt I had while I was on antipsychotics and suggested I would do it again, which finally convinced them to let me off the Clopixol and Seroquel. That's how Form 5 works. Your right to medical self-determination is transferred to a guardian, and they make all the choices regarding your health for you. Police can get involved otherwise. I thought things looked great. I thought I would be able to get high again. 6 months later, and here I am, 6 months off Clopixol and any other drug, and I still can't get a head rush off a cigarette or high off weed. I can't even get drunk. It just doesn't affect my brain anymore. I can't get high. Looks like this is a permanent side effect, folks. Now that's what I call a chemical lobotomy. Hey, you might remember me from the story of jogging barefoot on DPH. This psychosis actually happened before that event. This was a very bad experience, and hopefully it will make someone else realize what they are messing with. I am writing a warning to never do deliriants. I am an ex-deliriant addict, and this is what happens when you get into deliriant psychosis. It is not a joke. It is a very hellish experience. In this report, I am very ashamed of my actions, and I think I got what I deserved. This happened a while back, so I forgot some bits, but the traumatizing experience made me remember most of it. I wanted to experiment with scopolamine in the form of travel sickness tablets. I won't name the brand of the tablets because you should never buy these, unless maybe you actually need them for travel sickness. Being a psychonaut wannabe, I did 2 packs of these scopolamine tablets in the past, and tripped hard. Ever since then, I wanted to see what would happen when I would take 3 packs. There is 3.6 milligrams of scopolamine in each pack, so 3 packs would equal to 10.8 milligrams. However, I wouldn't do it without a trip sitter. I found a friend who said he would trip sit me, so he went to my house and I emptied the 3 packs of scopolamine and chewed them all in one go. I told my friend that under no circumstances should he let me go to sleep even if I wanted to. When the scopolamine kicked in, I started having severe dry mouth and throat. I tried chewing gum, which would normally help the dry mouth on DPH, but the dry mouth on scopolamine was so much worse that even the chewing gum tasted disgusting and was not helping at all. These tablets are supposed to treat nausea, but they were actually making me feel sick because my throat was so uncomfortably dry, it was unbearable. I told my trip sitter that I can't handle it and that I'm going to bed. I told him not to let me sleep, but I was actually grateful that he let me go to sleep because I was feeling miserable. I wasn't tripping or hallucinating anything at all. When I woke up, I saw some visuals in darkness, but that's about it. I started ranting to my friend about not tripping off the 3 packs of the scopolamine. 2 packs made me hallucinate, but 3 packs did not, and that frustrated me. I was thinking about doing 700 milligrams of DPH the very next day after 3 packs of scopolamine because I really wanted to trip. My trip sitter said he never joined the 700 club, so I was offering him to do it. I was actually a Christian, so I was trying to convert my friend to follow Jesus. I made him say the salvation prayer. Even after that, I was still trying to offer my friend 700 milligrams of DPH because I thought it would be funny to see him do it. My friend said that a voice in his head told him not to do it. It could have been God saying that. A Bible verse pops into my head. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a great milestone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. I was trying to make my friend, who literally just said the salvation prayer, to sin without realizing it myself. If you think the Bible is just stories, then stay tuned for what happens to me next. I believe it was God's wrath. Basically, I took the 700 milligrams of DPH, but for some reason, I also took it with 60 milligrams of pseudoephedrine and a can of alcohol. Yes, I just purchased a ticket to Psychosis Land. Earlier, my friend said he would trip sit me, but he was actually telling me that he needed to go home to feed his cat. I was literally begging him to stay because I just took 700 milligrams of DPH and I knew I needed a trip sitter, but he wouldn't stay, so I walked him to the bus station. When I got back home, I was playing Guitar Hero Live while waiting for the drugs to kick in. For some reason, I was hearing children hurling profanities at each other from out of the window. I thought it was a bit strange, but I didn't pay any mind to it. Then I noticed that the voices were not stopping. I was constantly hearing children shouting profanities. I looked out the window to try and see if there were any children, but I could not see anyone. I could still hear the voices though. I decided to go outside to check if what I was hearing was actually real or not. As soon as I walked past the neighbor's door, I got jump scared by a girl shouting something very loud, so I started running back into my house. I was panicking as I was hearing voices of gypsies coming from outside. They wanted to come after me and hurt me. I thought they were putting a ladder to climb in through my window. I can hear them being inside the house. I was trying my best to hold the door handle so they wouldn't enter my room. At the same time, I was shaking severely from all the drugs. My heart was racing very fast, and I constantly thought I was about to have a seizure, so I would lay on the floor being ready for the seizure, but it never happened. This repeated many times. I dialed 911, which is the American police number, and I actually live in the UK, but I was too delirious to know that the right number to call was 999. The people on the phone were not taking me seriously. I was telling them I wanted cops to come immediately because there are gypsies trying to kill me. They were telling me to call 111, so I tried that, but nobody on the phone was taking me seriously again. I was thinking that they might be in on it. I was absolutely convinced that my life was about to end at any second, and nobody on the phone cared. They were actually annoyed because I was calling them so often. I then hallucinated my laptop speaker turning into a guy with a gun pointing at me. I was hiding from the gun behind the couch. I think I even heard it being shot. At one point, my sanity literally broke, and I started yelling so loud as if I was actually being tortured. I have never heard that sound come out of my mouth. Eventually, one of the paramedics on the phone told me that there is nobody coming after me. They said they promised me that. I actually believed them and started feeling somewhat better. Whenever I needed a bathroom break, it was the scariest thing ever because I thought somebody was hiding somewhere with a knife. I got out of the bathroom as soon as possible and moved into my bedroom. I remember the voices saying that they put cyanide into all my water. I didn't even know what cyanide was before this encounter, no joke. This proves my theory of there being external demonic forces that were doing this to me. I was thinking of walking to my parents' house on the other side of town in the middle of the night because I was getting so freaked out of staying in my own house. Luckily, I sobered up just in time to not go outside. So yeah, this was one of the worst days of my life. Delirium addiction is very real, and it is not to be underestimated. The only thing that got me off DPH is literally Jesus Christ himself. I met him in my dream, and after that, I swore to him that I would never do DPH again. I have a theory why I tripped off the 2 packs of scopolamine and not off the 3 packs. When I did 2 packs, this was before I was baptized as a born-again believer. I believe it's not actually the drug that makes you trip. It opens a portal to demonic spirits, and they're the ones that give you the hallucinations to try and make you addicted. After I became a Christian, I no longer hallucinated when I took deliriums. No matter what dose, whether it was benzydamine, DPH, or scopolamine, I would never get any more hallucinations. The thing about demons and Satan is they are only allowed to do what God allows them to do, so they had this permission to torment me that day. I think the demons no longer had the power to make me hallucinate, but I falsely believed that I would hallucinate eventually. That's why I kept taking deliriums. Even though I literally proved my own theory, I refused to stop taking them. That's right, I was taking them even though they didn't make me hallucinate anymore. That's how addictive they are. I truly was a fool, and I pray that you do not make the same mistake that I did. Stay away from deliriums. They are drugs from Satan. If you yourself want to be saved and be led into heaven, all you have to do is believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord and that He died for your sins, and I promise you, you will be saved. He has given up everything for humanity, and all He asks in return is for us to believe.